2 years ago, I used to work as a cleaner, and one of the places I worked at was a daycare. Prior to this time, I had never had any ghost encounters, and I didn't even believe in ghosts. It happened that there was a newly opened daycare that our agency got contracted to work at. Before the daycare was open, the building used to be a church, and after years of being abandoned, a couple bought the property and converted it into a daycare. I had worked as a cleaner in that daycare for more than a week before I began to experience strange things. The first strange encounter I had in that daycare was on a cold winter evening. That day, my cleaning partner and I had just entered the building and turned on the lights to begin cleaning when we heard a child suddenly burst into laughter. It was so loud that we could trace the laughter from the room it came from, one of the nurseries there. That experience alone is one I'll never forget. That child's laughter sounded so real, and it gave us goosebumps because we were so sure the staff could not have left a child in the nursery. Talk more of turning off the lights and locking the child in the beginning. When we heard that laughter, my partner and I were so shaken that we did not say a word to each other for about 30 seconds. We just stared at each other, unsure of what to say. After wrapping our heads around what we'd just heard, my partner and I decided to go into that room and look to ensure the daycare had not been careless. As soon as I opened that nursery door, I could swear on my late dad's grave that I saw the swing stop. My partner didn't see it because I was ahead of him, but he believed me when I told him. For the rest of that night, we cleaned the daycare in fear, and as soon as we were done, we got out of there. Another strange experience I had in that same daycare was the issue of electric toys coming on their own. There was even one time my partner and I went into the nursery to take out the batteries from the toy that kept coming on. But even after taking out the batteries, that same toy would come on again after we stepped out of the room. It was so damn creepy. By the time we worked in that daycare for a month, my partner and I were convinced that the nursery was haunted because of the other strange things that kept happening. Most of the time, while cleaning, we would hear doors open and close, even when my partner and I would be the only ones in the building. We also had situations where things were moved from their original positions, especially after we'd already arranged and kept things in their right places. I think it was about 2 months after we began working in that daycare that we began to hear children's giggles and footsteps running in the corridor, particularly the corridor. At that point, my partner and I couldn't take it anymore. We were slowly losing our minds. The worst part was that whenever we told our colleagues about the things we experienced in that haunted nursery, they would just laugh at us and discard the topic. Thankfully, after so many complaints to our agency, we were assigned another place to clean. Now, I'm sharing this story because even though I experienced all these paranormal things, I still found it difficult to accept that ghosts and haunted houses were real until a few weeks ago, when I met somebody who used to work at that daycare too. She claimed she had experienced a lot of creepy and unexplainable things in that nursery that forced her to leave the job earlier than she anticipated. There was even a case of a child seeing a child ghost. It's quite sad that even places children are supposed to feel comfortable in can get haunted. I really hope the daycare has done something about it because she claimed she complained to the management before she left. This happened to me when I was a baby. Although I cannot remember the details, I'll share the story based on what my parents told me. So, when I was just 9 months old, my parents bought a house. It was a big house with a massive hectare of land behind and 6 large rooms. The best part was that my parents bought that house at a steal. The person who sold it to them sold it at an incredibly cheap price, almost like he was doing a giveaway. According to my parents, they'd only stayed in the house for 3 days when they began to encounter some things that were out of the ordinary. At first, it started with them hearing something that sounded like scratches on the wall and something walking in the ceiling. But they dismissed it as rats. It's a pretty old house and had been vacant for a while, so it was quite normal to have rats stuck in the walls or in the ceiling. Later that same week, my parents called an exterminator to come and take care of the rats, but when he got there, nothing was found. My parents admitted that it was quite strange, but there was nothing they could do about it. One of the 6 big rooms in the house was a nursery, and when we moved into that house, there were still toys and other children's stuff in the nursery. And for some weird reason, my parents decided to keep some of them. My mom claimed that the issue with the nursery began on the 4th night I started sleeping there. That night, she woke up to a baby crying loudly. But when she came to check on me, I was sleeping soundly and didn't look like I'd woken up at all that night. She said she was pretty confused when she saw me sleeping peacefully, but she shrugged it off and believed her mind played tricks on her. Well, it wasn't her mind, because shortly after she slept, the crying started again, and that second time, my dad heard it. Out of concern, my dad came to the nursery to check on me, but again he found me sleeping soundly and left confused. It was when both of them talked about waking up to a crying baby the following morning that they realized something weird was happening in the house, and they both experienced the same thing. Also, the scratches on the walls had become so loud that it began to sound like some wild animal was aggressively trying to tear through the walls. But each time they called someone to come and take a look, nothing would be found. Even with all of these things happening, my parents didn't take them seriously or think of doing something about the weird happenings until something began happening to me. According to them, precisely after my 1-year-old birthday, I began to act very differently and would cry nonstop for hours. Then, if I was left alone, I would giggle and laugh on my own as if someone was playing with me. Sometimes I would ignore my parents' presence and focus on reacting to or playing with whatever was in the room with me. When it all started, my parents believed I was just being a baby, until one day my mom had a dream, and in that dream, she saw me in the midst of children who looked dead. Rotten faces, pale skin, and clothes that looked like they were from the 80s. Also, I was laughing and playing with those children, and when my mom tried to call me, I didn't notice her presence at all. She said it was a very disturbing dream that forced her to visit a psychic. It was through that psychic's visit that my mom found out something was wrong and that I'd been sleeping in a haunted nursery. It was very terrifying for my parents, but thankfully they invited the psychic over to our house and she did a cleansing ritual. After that ritual was done, everything returned back to normal, including me. The scratches on the wall stopped, and a couple of other weird things I can't share here stopped too. Also, after everything was settled, my parents found out that 8 different families had lived in that house in the last 5 years before we moved in, and the original owners had lost 3 of their children to sickness in that nursery decades ago. It must have been the ghosts of the children playing with me. It's quite funny and amusing how one dream changed our lives forever. No one knows what would have happened to me if my mom hadn't had that dream or made the step of visiting a psychic. Maybe I wouldn't be telling this story now if she had not.